You are listening to the Enormo Cast.
We gotta get
Listen, where you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
It's
yeah, the big
fantastic.
place
Sold
that
it out.
side of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold
What's
it
that,
out.
20,000 seats?
You really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed playing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Good weather, bad weather. Now or later, anytime.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And don't forget our friends at Defiant Bean Roasters. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enorma at checkout for a discount on great coffee. Or click on the Defiant Bean banner at enormacast.com for more information.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enorma Cast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is February 4th, 2014. It's about 8:30 Mountain Standard Time. This is episode 51. That's right, we are on the march towards 100. I've survived the first 50, and I'm going to Hunsky. On today's show, we have the first half of a long and very interesting interview with Lynn Hill. We've all heard of Lynn Hill. She is one of the greatest American rock climbers of all time, even if she tries to deny it in the interview. This interview clocked in at about 140, so I'm going to split it into two, put them out in the next couple weeks. I know, you're probably like, Kalous, you fucker, that's cheating. Well, I'm also going to Mexico in a couple days for 3 weeks with my friend and your friend and friend of the show, Hayden Kennedy. So I'm going to go down there and hitch my wagon to that horse, which means I'm bringing a Jumar. Anyway, so the two halves of Lynn's interview will come out in the next couple weeks. A little bit of business I want you to know about is that I am going to be at the Red Rock Rendezvous, which is another one of those great climbing festivals that happens in the end of March. I believe it's the 28th to the 30th. And if you want more information about that, you can go to Mountain Gear's website. Mountain Gear puts it on, and frankly, you can just Google it. I mean, you guys are good at the internet. You found this show, didn't you? But I'm going to probably be doing a live show. We're sort of working out the details still, but I'll be there and talking to people and hopefully do a live show at the Red Rock Rendezvous this year. I've got a bunch of stuff lining up for the summer too, which I'm pretty excited about. So anyway, hopefully we'll run into each other out there. In the meantime, if you want to help out the show, please consider heading over to enormacast.com. Click on the Help Out tab. There's a bunch of things you can do on there to help the show. A few things that are real easy to do just to help increase popularity. I did actually cruise over to iTunes and see that I'm pretty much maintaining my spot in what's hot in outdoor podcasts, which is kind of like being the sharpest spoon. But that's kind of cool. Anyway, I was nestled there right next to the Dirtbag Diaries, actually, surrounded by gun podcasts. So I think we are sort of clinging together down there in the corner. The Dirtbag Diaries, still the perennial favorite in outdoor podcasts. But I'm creeping up on her. Creeping up. An easy way to support the podcast is also supporting our sponsors, Defiant Bean, Black Diamond, Maxim Ropes, climbinglawyer@gmail.com, and overhangclimbing.com for you UK and European listeners. Head over there and enter Enormo10 at checkout and get a discount. But anyway, you guys need gear, you need ropes, you need coffee. You may even need help with the law. So when it comes time to buy some gear, consider using our sponsors and let them know that you appreciate what they do for the show. All right. Let's get on to the first half of the interview with Lynn Hill. In this installment, we talk a lot about our history, about what she thinks about when she climbs, some of her philosophies about how she approaches climbing, some of the great and amazing figures that she's known in her time and was influenced by. So I've been wanting to talk to Lynn for quite a while, so I hope you enjoy this one. Interview with one of the best, Lynn Hill.
Yeah, and we're recording right now, so we're just going in here.
All right, then.
So I'm sitting in Lynn Hill's living room.
Nice.
With Lynn Hill. Her son Owen in the other room, sick, home from school. So thanks for having me over, Lynn.
It's a pleasure.
Really excited about this. I've had too much coffee and a bunch of sugar. And I like to start these things by maybe talking about the relationship that I have with you, and that, like most climbers, I've known something about you since I started climbing in 1989, and because you've been on the scene since way before that. But in particular in 1989, this was an era when you were, I think, competing in Europe still, but it was only a couple of years before the nose. So when I started climbing, you were in sort of this transition period, it seems like, looking at your history now. And so I may not have known who you were right then, but then only a few years later, the media blew up with you sort of reemerging back on the scene as this totally different climber after having freed the nose.
1989 was like a new life. I call it my second birthday. That's when I took a fall over 70 feet to the ground in Buttes, France, May 9th, my second birthday. So I was also in the media for that, and I came back really fast. It was just like a little blip during the competition season, and I was competing then, and took like 4 months, and I was back at Snowbird that year.
Okay, so you start your book with that, actually, Climbing Free. The first chapter talks about this fall, and I think a lot of people know about it. But could you sort of give us a quick little rundown of that as your second birthday?
Well, the moral of the story, I'll start with that, is buddy check. Always look at your partner's knot. I wasn't in the habit of that. I started a long time ago. It's almost 40 years ago now, 1975. And things were a lot different. We didn't have, the equipment, like the gree-grease didn't exist. We belayed, sometimes hip belay, or a figure eight, or a stitch plate, which is kind of like the ATC today. But anyway, I didn't develop those habits early on. Today, when people learn to climb, you learn all these things, and it just becomes part of your pattern. So I think this is an important thing to stress. So it was set up as a top rope, and I started to tie into the rope, and I saw that my shoes were off to the side, so I stopped tying my knot, and I went over to get my shoes. It was a little bit cool, and I had a jacket on, and I didn't take it off, so I didn't look back at my harness and see that I didn't finish my knot, because I had started it, left the rope in my harness, which miraculously stayed, and then since it was a top rope, it didn't fall out the whole time I was climbing up. Of course, I didn't feel the tension, and then I looked down, and I was distracted talking to somebody before I started climbing, which is also part of it, and then my partner was also distracted talking to that same person. And so I just leaned back and pulled the other side of the rope to cinch it to my harness, and that left me hanging on to a useless piece of rope because it was the other side of the rope, and I couldn't even hold on to the rope.
So you pulled the rope out of your harness while you were basically on top of the climb.
Yeah, I got to the
and you were
anchor.
holding onto this rope.
Yep.
That makes the whole situation so much more terrifying in my mind.
It was terrifying, but it was so terrifying, I don't even remember that moment exactly. It was kind of like a dream, a flash of a dream. I see the face of my partner looking up at me like surprised that I was flying out, from this top of the wall. It was, I'm sure, more horrifying for him to watch. But anyway, I guess I fall well and I bounce well.
Right.
But a tree kind of slowed me down, and it dislocated my elbow. It wasn't a big tree. It was a small green oak or something like that. But I was very lucky.
Yeah, it sounds like, and I thought I read that you maybe stress fractured your foot and dislocated your elbow.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the extent, besides probably bruises and cuts.
I cut my pectoralis muscle a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes I can feel it, but it's not significant.
Okay, so then expand on this idea that this was your second birthday.
Well, just the idea that I could have died So it's kind of like a rebirth in a symbolic sense.
Sure.
And, when you have a near-death experience, I think that it's normal to examine your life and question its meaning and its your vulnerability.
Sure.
So, of course, I thought a lot about that. I had a lot of time because I couldn't climb for a while. And then it was a slow, step-by-step process to get back, and you have to be patient. So, valuable lessons that we all need to be reminded of, not in that way, but just patience and making an effort every day, being happy with that.
That's interesting because there's something that kind of occurred to me about you in terms of your place in climbing. You were certainly one of the greatest, and I'm going to flatter you a little bit here, so get used to it. But you were certainly one of the greatest, certainly one of the greatest American climbers of all time. And in fact, at certain points in your career, you were the best in the world, a guy or a girl.
I don't really subscribe to that sort of labeling. I think that everybody has unique talents, and people have said that about me. And so the labels, certainly they point to somebody's achievement in an area, like mine being that I'm a woman, a small woman. I was introduced to climbing a long time ago before it was even a sport. In fact, when I started climbing, I never even saw a picture of a rock climber before. I had no idea what it was. So we're talking dark ages. And in some ways, that's a huge advantage because nothing's been done. Well, in a relative sense, a lot had been done. I just didn't know about it. And then there was a lot to be done. And for the kind of athlete that I was becoming even then as a young gymnast, climbing was perfect for me. It just suited me in so many ways. And I loved being outside. I loved going on camping trips with my family. And it was just so much a part of what I liked. And it was great to discover the sport and be able to kind of stay on the leading edge, so to speak, because, there weren't very many other women around.
Right.
And even the sport itself wasn't that big.
I mean, I totally agree with your assessment of where you fit in the beginning. And even though I'm, going to throw these accolades around and you can take them however you want, certainly. I mean, we unfortunately, in a way, talk about you obviously when you're not around. And that's the funny thing is I was going to point out is that your name actually is sort of like this, you get used a lot to represent certain things. You may not even know this. I'm sure you have some idea, but it's funny. You ever heard of that game Magic: The Gathering with the little cards?
Yes.
I'd say kids play it, but actually a lot of adults do too. But anyway, and they throw these cards that have these like magic spells in them. The Lynn Hill card gets chucked around all the time. You get used to help shorter people climb. You get used to help women climb. And you also get used to help people check their knots. Because I've heard someone complain about a move being too long and someone else there goes, "What do you mean? Lynn Hill climbs stuff like that all the time and she's like 4.5 feet tall or whatever." And then, or some woman complains about, "Oh, too thuggy," and the Lynn Hill card comes out like, "Lynn Hill can climb like that? What's wrong with you?" And then I've also heard like, "Oh yeah, everybody screws their knot up. Even Lynn Hill screwed her knot up," So
just didn't tie it.
So it's funny because it's like whether you like it or not, we're like throwing your name around as these like lessons to people out there in the world. And I mean, the knot one is somewhat unfortunate, but I think the looking at your career and looking at who you tried to be throughout your career, the one where we throw you down to encourage women to climb, I think is totally legitimate, because looking back at your career and reading about a lot of things you did, even protesting in competitions about the disparity with prize money between men and women, climbing on the men's routes or insisting that the routes get set similarly and all these sorts of things. Have you felt that throughout your career, this sort of idea that you could be something of an inspiration or symbol to women climbers or women athletes in general?
Well, I definitely think it's flattering that people use my name, like you said, and I do know that, especially the smaller women, when I do talks and they come up to me, I get so many people saying that, "Oh, my husband or my boyfriend or my friend, whatever." oh, Lynn Hill could do that. And so I know that one.
It's a lot of pressure.
Well, to me, that's really easy in a
Right.
sense. That's like, beginning level. Where it gets tough is when you've got to go out there and be an advocate and protest, or, like in the example that you brought up, I had money to lose doing that. And I was a starving student. And
Sure.
I did feel that it was important to at least say it and make an issue of it, because that's how progress is made. If you don't say anything about it, nothing will change. And I didn't think it was fair. Since I was a little girl, I didn't think that it was fair. There were a lot of things that I didn't particularly like. Even in our school, when it rained, you could wear pants to school. Otherwise, girls had to wear these horrible little skirts or dresses. And I didn't think that it was fair, because my legs were cold and I
Sure.
liked wearing pants. I wear pants almost every day still. And so there were things that, that's a small example, but privileges and support in sports and things like that. I also went to the White House to celebrate the Title IX amendment, which gave equal funding to girls and women for education and sports. There were a lot of things that weren't the same. And in my mother's generation, it was way worse.
Sure.
Girls weren't even allowed to do physical activities. It was like not only not supported, it just wasn't offered. And girls are supposed to act this way and boys are supposed to act that way. And from a very early age, I knew that I wasn't that and I wasn't going to be that. And I was happy being who I was. So it gave me a lot of strength to follow through with what was true for me, because I knew that that was more true than this other stuff that didn't seem to apply.
And you grew up in a pretty big family.
Yes.
6 or 7, is that what I read, kids?
7.
7.
That definitely helped my independence.
What was the ratio of brothers, sisters?
4 brothers, 2 sisters.
Okay. So there was, that seems like that would breed some sort of, tomboyishness and, having to hold your own amongst all these siblings, if nothing else, especially with all these boys around.
Yeah, but I pretty much shared a room with my sister Trish, who's
Okay.
a year and 3 months older than me. And we all had our independent things too. We went on camping trips, which were a lot of fun. But I don't think we really fought a whole lot.
Okay.
Even with my sister, I'm kind of more of a pacifist than anything. I don't like confrontation, and I like things to be harmonious. So I always seek to find that on the rock or in my relationships. And
Sure.
I've always been that way. And I don't really like asking for help. And that, my mother said that, I tied my own shoes at 2. And I just remember these childhood sort of ideas and memories and kind of compare with my son, and I was a lot different. I wanted to do everything myself, probably because I needed to some degree, but also because I liked being in control of my own, my own body and what I was doing, and independence, I guess.
So how old were you about when you did start climbing or the first time? Do you remember the first time? Do you have some
of
good
course.
memories of it?
Yeah. I was 14, and I was with my older sister, actually both sisters, and my sister's boyfriend and my brother. So the boys went off and did their climb, and my sister's boyfriend, Chuck, said, okay, so Kathy, you should teach the girls how to climb, and we're going to go off over here. So
Where were you?
Big Rock in California.
Okay.
So it's a slab, which is not intuitive at all when you first start climbing. I had to wear my sister's shoes, which were these RDs, René de Maison, like kind of stiff and boat-like shape. And being a little bit big, my feet were sliding around in them, and you had to friction on a granite slab. And there's not like distinctive handholds. There's like these little irregularities on the rock edges. I didn't know what the names of these were,
Sure.
but little bumps and things. And I said, well, what happens if I fall here? And she's like, oh, climb up there and clip that carabiner into the bolt and then clip your rope. And so she explained how to clip in, because I was leading my first climb.
You've never climbed before and you're leading.
My sister was afraid to
And
climb
your sister
herself.
was sort of giving you some little bit of information, enough not to end up on your back on the ground.
The funny thing is, she is very responsible. She's the oldest of all of us. So
Sure.
we would call her Mom, just nickname. And she could tell, how to tie the figure 8 and the Swiss seat that we used as a harness, and here's some shoes, and here's a carabiner and all that stuff. But she didn't want to lead. And she figured that I would be able to lead, and she was right. I was a little nervous when I realized that, once you clip the bolt, you climb above it, and then you're going to fall below it. And I kind of knew that this was not the safest thing, or it didn't seem like what I expected. I don't know what I expected, but, when people say that it's a sport and there's special shoes and helmets and all this stuff, you think that everything is just, pretty well set up. But in climbing, it really depends on you and not falling. And as a general rule in the beginning, do not fall.
And I got to get this. So Chuck was
Kathy's
boyfriend. Okay, because then you went on to sort of go get into the climbing scene with them.
Yeah,
is that right?
Mostly with Chuck.
Yeah,
and my sister kind of veered more and more towards school, so she worked her way through college.
So as you moved into the kind of climbing scene with Chuck, and I would assume he probably had some friends. Can you give us an impression of what it was like? This would have been the mid-'70s. Is that about the time frame, like 75, 76?
I started in 75, and, it was kind of like vertical backpacking. You go out on weekends, and pretty soon it was any weekend I could. I bought a car at 16, and, I saved money to buy a crappy car, which I wrecked out in Yucca Valley, slipped on ice. I didn't know that you had to have tires with good, treads. Anyway, so at that time, I think I might have been 17 when that happened. And it must have been midwinter because it was snowing. It was really cold. It does snow in Joshua Tree sometimes. But usually we would go out and we'd head out either to Talkeets or Joshua Tree on the weekends. And if I was climbing with Chuck, it would be some route that he's read something about or knows something about its reputation, and he'll go out and try it. And oftentimes he had a lot of ambition to try things really that had a reputation or that were hard. And I was completely clueless, and I'd sit there and belay him and, fly around in the air if he fell. So one of these climbs was Trespassers Will Be Violated. I wrote about this in my book because it was just one of those experiences that I do remember pretty well, because he would go up to, I think it's like the first or second bolt, and there's only like 3 or 4 on the route. And he kept falling because it was very technical, and you had to traverse to the right, and, really tiny little edges, and you had to get your sequence perfect. And he kept swinging off, and it was an unpleasant fall because it was swinging sideways. And he said, "Here, do you want to try it?" And I got up there, and that was all he had to do, was just sucker me in, and I would just tune into whatever needed to be done, and I got past the crux. And then I realized, oh my God, look at this. This is huge run out that, I got past the crux, but now I'm really far away from the bolt, and I'm really committed because I can't go back. I have to keep going. And, sometimes you don't even see where the next bolt is. It's just like, do not fall. And so sometimes it was pretty horrifying to climb with Chuck, because he would fail on a route, and then I would go up and I would get suckered into finishing it.
Well, it's interesting because it's like, that's the way people had to learn how to rock climb to a certain extent. I mean, it was a result of the area you were climbing in. And this is in Josh, is that right?
That was Joshua Tree.
And so in that era, there were, those 1 and 2 bolt routes exist all over that park, or I don't know if they've gotten retro bolted or not, but that was the style. So it's certainly one way to learn how to climb in terms of just being forced into these situations that you have to get out of. It probably in the long run, looking back, made you this pretty resourceful climber.
I think that having started to trad climb first was so useful, because you learn how to calculate risks and be responsible and actually visualize whether you're going to make it or not. Because I won't just leap out there and go for something unless I'm pretty sure I'm going to make it, because of that instinct of don't fall.
Right.
And so there was this visual thing that would go back and forth, and it happens really fast. I actually did a sort of like a little experiment with Russ Clune when he was studying sports psychology, and I think they called them meta-thoughts. It comes from neuro-linguistic programming. But anyway, I think that those skills are really useful even for sport climbing. You can use it in daily life, just the idea that you recognize red flags and fear, and you know how to accept it instead of fight against it, and then come to that clarity in evaluating the situation and finding the right solution.
Yeah, actually, this will maybe be a tangent, but one person asked me to sort of ask you about maybe a little bit about your mental state in climbing and kind of where your mind goes in terms of when you approach climbing. Is there, I guess my question is do you have different ways of approaching different type of climbing, or do you think this thing you maybe were just talking about or something similar to that is what kind of exists when you go into that mode?
Well, I think that there are so many different states of mind when I climb. It depends on the situation. I've climbed for almost 40 years, so sure. It's evolved too, but it depends on if I'm doing it for kind of moving meditation. I'm just kind of like cyclists, they do cadence or mileage, and they don't really think too much. But climbing can be extremely just flow, like you're not thinking at all. If you are thinking, you're probably distracted, thinking about something about your daily life, and that can happen. You can be climbing and suddenly you're not totally engaged in the moment. You're maybe resting or something, and you start thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. That happens. I think there's a lot of different states of mind, even during the course of one climb. But generally, my state of mind is to, if I'm just engaged in climbing, is to look at the route and see it from sort of a general perspective. And then as I'm climbing, I'm, in this process, and I'm not 100% conscious of it. It's just happening. I can be conscious of certain aspects of it. And so I'm planning maybe 2 or 3 moves, hand, foot, kind of visualizing where I'm going to go. And then when you're actually moving, there's a certain internal sensitivity of your balance points. And that's another thing that's kind of goes into the realm of having practiced it so many years, it's automatic. And it's like a well-designed computer program, it kind of just does its function and it's really easy. But if you get into the psychology of maybe what the person asked about, how does she prepare? Okay, so if we're talking about for the nose or competition or something that's really important and involves my absolute best performance, that's a whole nother discussion. And I remember reading all kinds of books, about the inner game of tennis and, Warrior's Way and all this kind of stuff. And I could relate to a lot of it because a lot of it is kind of, I don't know if you'd call it Zen or Buddhist philosophy, but pretty much that approach where you're open and you observe and you're not judging and you're not reacting. You're just trying to make the best decision. And when your ego gets involved, it's really, I think it's important to watch your ego and see why you're motivated sometimes. That's a whole nother tangent, but I think it's relevant. Okay, we'll just take the nose. I was underneath the Great Roof before I had even free climbed that pitch, and just kind of thinking about what this climb meant to me and what it could mean for women and this bigger meaning that had nothing to do with necessarily me. I was the medium making it happen. But if I was too attached to the outcome for me and my ego, it's too fragile. It's too much pressure. I knew that I couldn't do that. And I didn't want to do that. That wasn't where I was motivated from. So it might sound like a subtle difference, but it had meaning, but it wasn't so much the meaning attached to me as the ability to do it, because I knew it could be done. And that's maybe another thing that people find unusual about me, or why does she think she can do it? And to me, it's almost the opposite. Why do you think you can't do it? I always just look for the way to do something if I want to do something, and that's how you kind of get better and are able to do things.
Well, that's really fascinating because it seems to me that it's always been this thing where so many people would call something impossible, and then it only takes sometimes a couple years after it gets done for it just to become routine. Now, freeing the nose has not happened in that progression. But I mean, even if you go back to like the first time they saw Pikes Peak, some guy said, that will never be climbed. And then, now you can drive to the top of it, or you'll never climb 511, or 512 is the top of the grade. It'll never get harder than this. And to hear you say that really speaks to, I think, what it takes to break through those barriers is to go at it from the, why can't I do it? Let's start with, I can do it, and maybe I'll prove myself wrong. But if we start from there, then the possibilities are open for advancing everything.
I think what it takes is a certain objectivity in your perspective, not so attached, like I was saying, to the ego and in the me part of it. Like, I remember, this is not exactly related, but I was climbing in Volks, and it was many years ago, and 513 was hard. It was hard for me. And I looked at the route, and I was looking at the holds and thinking, this is just not hard. I know it feels hard, but people are going to be warming up on 513. I know it. In my lifetime as a climber, this is not hard. So it's just a matter of taking yourself out of it to see objectively what it is that you're looking at. And the people that make those statements like, a woman will never do this, or, that's impossible. And at one point, 510 was the definition of the limit of human ability. I find it interesting that people can be so short-sighted to think that there is a cap like that.
Let me ask you another question on this mental game. Everybody deals with fear in climbing. True fear, like, I don't want to hit the ground, fear of failure, all these sorts of things. I don't know that, I think in your sort of wider reputation, you're known as someone who pushes really dangerous routes. I've never known you, at least in the media, to be a free soloer. And yet, as I looked through, your resume and did some research, you've done all these things. You've done difficult, scary routes. Particularly, I think I looked in some of the stuff in the Gunks had some scarier ratings on it. And then just climbing every day, even if it's not technically super dangerous route, deal with fear of falling all the time. And I think, for all climbers, it comes into play, and it'd be interesting to hear sort of in 40 years what you've learned about yourself with fear, or climbing on El Cap. Even if the protection's good, you're 2,000 feet off the ground. So normal human reaction is to be a little bit fearful. What have you learned about yourself in terms of dealing with that?
Well, I definitely have fear. I don't want to fall. I don't want to hurt myself. Don't want to die climbing. But I'd say first thing is you have to evaluate the risk. Is it really life-threatening? Or is it just, I don't want to fall because it's a scary feeling. It's uncomfortable. I deal with that just like anybody else. And the times that I've done those scary routes, like you're talking about in the Gunks and in my earlier climbing, it was started out with just being naive sometimes, or I was tired and I didn't want to stop and fiddle in a nut because I thought it would be more tiring to put gear in than just to keep climbing. I remember making that decision a couple times. Or I thought, well, I really ought to put protection in, but this is a really big, crack. My hands are comfortable in it and it's tiring. I didn't quite probably know how to relax straight arm. And I put in a bad piece, and my partner came up and said, that protection was really bad. And I kind of knew that. So that was kind of early on. But then in the Gunks, some of those routes, I didn't really know how dangerous they were going to be. It was just part of the ethic of the times that you try things from the ground up in this very pure style, and you wouldn't feel good if you cheated in any way. So it was kind of this really noble, pure approach to climbing, and being able to deal with fear was part of the success of your performance. And I didn't really fall that many times, fortunately, because I think in a few of those cases, they would have been really bad falls. And like I said, I'm glad that I started out trad climbing and that I was able to stay clear and make the right decisions, but it isn't something I look for. I don't really want to get hurt climbing. It's not a game that I put foremost in my life, especially as a mother right now. It's much more important for me to stay healthy and push myself in other ways. And fear can be a part of it, but more just like scary airball falls versus, ground falls or bad protection. And free soloing, I just won't even allow myself to do it. I can totally appreciate how nice that feeling is to be climbing without a rope and in control, but it would be selfish of me to put myself at risk like that when I'm in a position where I'm somebody's mother. I'm not really able to cast my life out so easily.
Sure.
Not that somebody who's soloing thinks of it that way, but it is a risk that you don't need to take.
Yeah, I think, most people that start families change their way of climbing. It seems to seep into the brain to start to think about those sorts of things, as opposed to being, wild and free and with no connections to anybody. But
I actually was pretty reasonable even before having a kid because I wanted to have a kid. But even if that wasn't a reality, I think it's still important to make good decisions. Mm-hmm. And I don't want soloing that much to risk as much as you have to risk. One life. If you make a mistake, rock breaks, a bird flies around, a snake, who knows what unexpected thing could happen. But it happens. There have been numerous very good free soloists that aren't here today.
Certainly, yeah. So I'd like to switch gears. I want to keep talking a little bit about your history and your climbing career as well as your philosophy. So I have some people here that I think you would consider influences on your climbing. And so I just want to bring some up, and maybe you could, if you want to sort of define the relationship that you had, but more talk about maybe what you learned from them or how they influenced your climbing. We talked about your sort of original mentor, Chuck, already, so I'll skip that one. What about John Yablonsky?
John Yablonsky, he was a good friend and also somebody that was very volatile. And I felt that he put a lot of importance on our relationship. He thought we were like soulmates and past lives and meant to be together. And so he had a little bit of delusion about that. But I understood that we also did have a sincere friendship, and it was based on our bond and love of climbing. And we met when, free climbing was done in very strict traditional style. And he was kind of like a ninja warrior purist. And, he would risk anything to do the best job that he could, which was, again, where sometimes I wasn't sure where the boundaries should actually be, because I could see that he would go too far. And, we'd see him soloing and shaking, and he would be doing it in front of his friends, me and the handful of people that would meet every weekend, including John Backer and Michael Leklinsky, Mari Gingery, and Dean Fidelman, his girlfriend Jessica Perrin. So there was, kind of a revolving group of people, and it was a very close community because we felt like we were just, very privileged to have Joshua Tree and these places that we'd climb in to ourselves, in a sense. It wasn't like a world destination so much, and there weren't that many people establishing routes. So you can imagine that it was a really important community for all of us. So Yabo was a brother, and also somebody that I think was inspiring because he tried so hard, and he wanted to do it so well, and he wasn't going to let his own personal desires get in the way. He was really able to eat mayonnaise sandwiches for, a week at a time because he wanted to be out there climbing. Sure. I mean, that for most people that's unreasonable and it's crazy, but there was a certain beauty in his dedication. And, there weren't very many options. If you wanted to be a full-time climber, it wasn't like you had any sponsorship. You had to make some money and then go live out in a climbing area somewhere. And usually that meant in a tent or less. Sometimes he didn't have anything except for the bag on his back. I wasn't willing to live quite that way. That's why I decided to get a college education. Right.
You did for a bit, though. I mean, you obviously dabbled in that lifestyle here and there.
Yeah, in the summertime.
Camp 4 and whatnot.
Yeah, I definitely was living a dirtbag lifestyle for weeks at a time, but not years at a time. I decided that I would rather have a better quality life by bettering myself and getting an education that could serve a purpose that would actually pay me a professional wage so that I could actually go climbing and have a car and food and, some comforts. And so, yeah, I did get a degree in biology, which I didn't really use for my profession directly, but it does make me feel good that I got through school and that I made that choice to be, a better person through education. Well, I don't know if it makes you a better person, but better educated and better able to give back. Mm-hmm. That's all.
Let me pull out another one. Actually, one of the nicest women of climbing I've ever met, Mari Gingery.
She's a dear friend.
You guys climbed El Cap together early on? Is that, I read that, like the Shield?
The Shield.
Right? Yeah. Way back.
We didn't really know what we were doing. We weren't aid climbers. We were free climbers from Southern California, but Yosemite was the rite of passage, big walls, and they weren't done free back then. I mean, parts of them, because it was simply easier and more efficient. But you weren't judging yourself if you took and held on a piece. It was more free climbing between gear so that you could get up faster, because big wall climbing takes so long, especially if you're nailing in the head wall of the Shield or something. It's tedious. So our boyfriends, John Long and Mike Klinsky, said, okay, here, take these pitons, and there's really not much to know. You just hammer them in and you tie them off like this. And so we cast off. We could barely carry all the gear and hauling on the beginning.
She's not any bigger than you are.
She's a little bit bigger, but probably doesn't weigh much more. And so it was pretty funny watching us haul. It took two of us to haul the bag. Because, of course, the lower the angle, the harder it is to haul, and the beginning of El Cap is not that steep. But anyway, it took us 6 days. Mm-hmm. And I think when we were younger, our personalities weren't developed as much as they are now, and we're more comfortable in ourselves. And I think our friendship has grown as we have. And so I remember being on that wall, and it is kind of a solitary thing in a way, even if you're on the wall with somebody, because most of the day you're either leading or you're belaying. Mm-hmm. At night it's different, but I don't remember talking a whole lot on the wall because we were just like on this sea of granite, just, trying to figure out how to pioneer our way up that thing. It wasn't pioneering in the sense of breaking new ground, but for us we didn't know what we were doing at all. Mm-hmm. And I remember hammering a lost arrow in, and it wasn't in that deep, and it was actually kind of an expanding flake. I thought, well, that's good enough. I'm kind of in a hurry. I want to get up to the next piece, and I tied it off, and I'm standing up, and it ripped out, and I took a backwards fall into this dihedral, and I was like, I guess I should pay more attention to these pitons. I had a couple scary moments on walls like that, but I think it was great to build character. A vertical retreat is a good idea for people to do, every once in a while, once a year, once every 2 years or something. I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
But Mari was a great partner then, and we would, try to figure out our own sequences on boulder problems or routes or whatever, because we were smaller than most of the rest of the guys, and her approach was so graceful. She was kind of like a ballet dancer, you could see she's very light and uses this sort of a Aikido approach where you take the force and you redirect it.
Sure.
She just never looked like she was ever really trying very hard, but she didn't show it. And that's kind of how her personality is. She's very observant and patient and supportive, and tries to do the right thing, tries to be respectful of other people and do her part. She's still working at the lab at UCLA. She does, I guess it's called electron microscopy and basically research, really high-level research. And so she's followed her career like she has in academia, like she has in her life. She just has gotten better and better at it.
Okay, another one from back in those days, actually, Beverly Johnson.
Beverly, I didn't know her as well as I would have liked to, but I met her in connection with the Survival of the Fittest. Mm-hmm. Mike Hoover, who is her husband, said, "Why don't you call Lynn and ask her if she'd like to compete in this event?" And I was so thrilled. Beverly Johnson called me, and yes, of course I'm going to compete in this Survival of the Fittest. That was the competition where the prize money wasn't equal at first. Meeting her in person, I was really happy that she was so easygoing, and she was the kind of person that she would undermine the seriousness of it. If it was really scary or difficult, she would be like, yeah, it's a little scary, but it's okay. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing. And so I could imagine her being this, one of the few women in Camp 4 before my time, just hanging out with the guys and not making a big deal about it. And, sure, we'll go for it. Her and Sibylle Hechtel did the first female ascent of El Cap in 1973. And I don't know how many days it took them, but I don't think it took them that long. Then Beverly did a solo ascent of El Cap in 1978, which I was very impressed by. It was a year before she called me for this competition. So I was happy to know that there were other women that were actually adventurous and feminine without being too prissy or, just normal. To me, that was normal. And I didn't have very many examples of women that embraced all these qualities that I appreciated.
All right, well, let's jump into the future from there a little bit. Catherine Destiville.
She was touted as my rival in the media, and it was kind of funny because, we were these pawns in a media game in that sense, and yet as people, we were also unique in that we were pushing levels of climbing in our respective countries at a time when it wasn't happening, and she was a very, and still very talented climber, very intuitive, very fast. She's one that I'd say probably doesn't even ask herself, how did I do that? She's not like trying to analyze it like I analyze things to try to learn from it and also to try to teach. And I'm kind of fascinated by it, even though I also just climb, intuitively at this point. I mean, and what does intuitive mean? It's kind of a combination of experience and just your body's natural reaction to something. But I see Catherine as an extremely intuitive climber, and as a person, I think she's driven without being, super stubborn about it. I think she was pushed a lot by people around her in her career, and then realized, well, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, sure, that seems like a good idea. And then she would set her mind to it and achieve it because she has the ability, and people around her saw that, and they saw that as a commodity. Because in France at the time, and probably still true today, but especially back then, when you looked at how climbing was developing as a sport, the French were really getting into it. They were starting the competitions. The French Federation was getting really into studying it as a sport and, the psychology, and they have a really well-developed system to become a guide. You have to know all kinds of things that really aren't even taught here. The pedagogy, or what is it, the study of teaching and even orienteering and all that stuff. So they were putting a lot of resources in it, and she even got sponsored by Whirlpool at one point. It's an American company, but they were really big over in Europe. And the idea was throw money at these heroes because that will bring the sport along. And I think that they were right. Patrick Edlanger and Catherine were both on primetime TV at a time when there were only a few stations, and everybody saw them, and everybody thought it was so cool. Patrick with his bandana that he pretty much copied from Ron Kauk, seeing it in Yosemite and the slack line and the jogging and all this stuff. But it was a whole new kind of approach to sport, this sort of lifestyle. And so I think that both Catherine and Patrick profited from that and were brought right to the forefront of being a star, not just a rock climbing star, but they were like big names in Europe.
Certainly.
France.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly, as you were.
Not as much so, because I was la petite Americaine.
Yeah, of course.
I was not one of them, really. I was just one of the players in the game, and I think they appreciated that, but there's nothing like being from that country. if you're a star of France than you are.
Yeah, of course. Okay, this is sort of we'll go back in time a little bit. And in terms of your lore, your mythology, the big one is John Long.
Of course. I thought you were going to ask about him first.
Well, I have an idea of a segue, so.
Okay. Oh, well, John Long he's an amazing character. He's bigger than life. He's one of these people that loves entertaining. And sometimes when he tells a story, you don't know which part of it was true and which part of it was embellished. And I'm not even sure he knows sometimes.
Sure.
But it's a really good story, and he's very creative in the way that he tells stories, his word choice, and just the imagery he uses, and humor. Mm-hmm. And one of the first things that he said to me in this sort of way was, I think I was about 17 in Yosemite, in the Camp 4 parking lot or something, and he recited this poem, The Naked Maiden Soloing. And it's basically this woman who just floats up this route without a rope. And you can kind of imagine he's the guy in the story following this woman and just idolizing how beautiful she is as she's climbing. And so he follows her, and he gets to this point on the face where he's about to fall, and she throws down a rope for him, and he's like, oh, thank God. And he ties into it, and he gets to the top, and he looks around for her, and there's nothing but a note that says something like, he can be nobody's fool, or something, mm-hmm. Kind of just funny, that she was like, never mind, and runs off, kind of. And so it was, his story made the woman seem like she was really cool and very strong, and he was this fool, and it just kind of was funny, mm-hmm. and self-effacing, and sometimes that irony that makes writing and stories interesting. So that was very early on. I was impressed with John, and plus he was just physically very beautiful body, very muscular, and certainly not shy.
So you guys, spent a few years together, and particularly an era where you were traveling around the United States. So what do you think the sort of lasting influence he had on you as a climber?
Well, I guess at the time when we met, I was used to athletics in a certain sense and pushing myself in a certain way, but I wasn't so bold as to say, let's go do this and let's go do that. And so John, being such a strong personality, was going to go straight to the prize and, leap out there. However good you had to be to do that, it didn't matter. That's what he wanted to do. It was the thing that was most alluring. So he kind of opened my eyes to even trying to do that stuff. I didn't really think of climbing as achievement oriented so much, but I think he, just by his ambitions, kind of pushed me along in a way that was good for me. And he was the one that said, hey, Lenny, you have little fingers. You should go try to free climb the nose, the famous, small fingers thing, which I think is funny. But he was right.
Or no fingers.
Or 9.5 fingers.
Right. The other guy that's done the roof is got 1.5. Actually, Beth did it too, didn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah. So small fingers or 9.5 fingers.
No, that's the joke of it. It's not about your body size. It's not about any of that stuff. It's about what John represents here. And what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't really matter all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Here's what we want to do right here. Let's focus on this. You want to do this? Okay, let's try to do that. And so when we set our minds to whatever route it was, we would always end up doing it. I don't remember ever failing on anything. We would always just, okay, so let's try. There was a route in Independence Pass. I still haven't been back since then. It was, I think, 1978 or 9.
Is it P-Brain?
P-Brain, yeah. That one, and there was another one, 7th Octave or something. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I just remember those two routes. And P-Brain was scary, I think. Mm-hmm. He led that one. And I read something that he wrote about it not long ago, and he said something like, I made a comment to him afterwards, like, John, I was very uncomfortable with you doing that because it was like 12C soloing in the beginning of it. And if he fell, it would have been a bad fall. But he wanted to do this route. So, he kind of pushed it. And And I was really glad that he didn't fall. But I said, look, just be careful. And he, the way I said it to him made an impression on him, that I cared so much that he don't push it, beyond a certain point. But anyway, he also pushed me to break the world record in the bench press, which I don't know if I ever actually did, but I got to 150 pounds. And then I realized this is really strange. This is changing my musculature. I'm getting triceps that are too big, and it's competing with my climbing muscles. And I didn't enjoy lifting weights. But he raised the bar. He said, okay, let's see if you can raise the bar and do this. Because, he had so much confidence in me that he thought I could do it, which I did do. But it was making me gain weight as well, like muscle. And I didn't like it.
All right, thanks for listening to the first half of the Lynn Hill interview. Owen was also there in the background. He stayed home from school, as I mentioned, and stomach ache. That was his ploy. Stomach ache's easier than fever. You don't have to mess with the thermometer. Anyway, pretty soon he was outside doing cartwheels, so I think his mom figured it out. If you are itching to learn more about Lynn Hill already, you can order her book, Climbing Free: My Life in the Vertical World, which is out of print, but you can get it from lynnhillclimbing.com. Lynn has a bunch left, and I'm sure she'd be happy to sign one if you emailed her. So check that out. And coming up is going to be a pretty detailed discussion about the nose, freeing the nose, and how she went about it. It was quite a bit different than what people do today. So look forward to that in a couple weeks. I'm off to Mexico, but I'll put that thing out for you in a couple weeks while I'm gone, magically. And hopefully I'll come back in one piece. And I think now my sign-off has a little bit more weight since Lynn Hill brought it up in the beginning of this episode. The Lynn Hill admonished all of us to check our knots. So do it.
Our next guest is ranked number one in the world by the Association of Sports Climbers International. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the best rock climber in the world, Lynn Hill. Hi. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
The world is round now, it ain't flat. The teachers told me that's